Welcome everyone to another deep dive.
Hey there.
We're really thrilled to have you riding shotgun with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we even get into the thick of it, I just want to remind you to hit that like button and subscribe to the show.
Definitely do that.
It's really the best way to ensure you never miss out on the knowledge that shapes our world.
Right.
Today, we are embarking on a truly massive, frankly, a pretty provocative mission.
Not an understatement.
Yeah. We are reviewing a highly requested 2025 ebook titled Truth Warrior, Defeating Zombie Hordes of Groupthink.
And that's by Conrad Riker.
Right, by Conrad Riker. And right off the bat, I want to direct you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the full book.
Highly recommend getting the full text.
And make sure you follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
Yeah, Conrad Riker.
This deep dive is really designed to hook you into the core tenets of the text, to unpack its mechanics, and give you a very serious taste of why you might want to pick up the full book and study it for yourself.
Because it is undeniably a text that pulls zero punches. To set the stage for you, we really need to talk about who this book is speaking to and what it's trying to achieve.
Right.
This particular deep dive is tailored specifically for those of you who have an interest in the men's rights movement, the broader red pill community, and frankly, anyone who is actively seeking to understand the foundational history of Western institutions.
Right, specifically before they were, as the author vigorously posits, captured by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
Exactly.
Yeah?
Riker's work isn't just, a standard political commentary.
No.
It is a sweeping, aggressive diagnosis of modern culture. He's blending classical Western philosophy, evolutionary psychology, and really hard historical analysis.
To create what he views as a survival manual.
Yeah, a literal manual.
Okay, let's unpack this. But before we dive into the deep end, we do need to state a crucial impartiality disclaimer.
Very important.
I want to speak directly to you, the listener, for a second here.
Yeah, listen up.
The source material we're covering today is highly politically and ideologically charged.
Very.
It touches on gender, politics, institutional trust, the culture wars, all of it.
The whole 9 yards.
And as your guides on this deep dive, we are not taking sides.
No.
We are not endorsing the right-wing or the left-wing viewpoints presented in this book.
Our goal, our strict mission today, is just to impartially report, unpack, and thoroughly analyze Conrad Riker's arguments.
Right, and the philosophical frameworks he uses.
We are here to look at the architecture of his argument.
Exactly. We want to understand how he builds his case. Nothing more, nothing less.
That is the perfect framing. Our objective is to deconstruct this manual.
So we're going to examine exactly how he synthesizes ancient philosophy with modern behavioral science.
Right, to arm what he terms the truth warrior against modern groupthink.
To truly understand the architecture of his argument, though, we have to start at the very foundation of his societal diagnosis.
We do. And Riker's foundational premise is that Western civilization hasn't just, accidentally stumbled into its current cultural moment.
Right. He argues it has deliberately and systematically regressed.
Yeah. He claims we've moved from reason, which he strictly defines as masculine-coded logic, debate, and a pursuit of objective truth.
Over to feeling.
Exactly. Which he defines as feminine-coded emotionalism, consensus building, and safety.
And to explain how this shift happened, he introduces a concept he calls the gynocentric silence.
Yes.
I read this section a few times because it's quite the claim. What exactly does he mean by this term?
It is definitely one of the more contentious pillars of his argument.
For sure.
What is structurally fascinating here is how Riker takes an anthropological concept from our evolutionary past.
Right.
And he maps it directly onto modern corporate and political power dynamics.
Okay, map that out for us.
So if you look back at the ancestral environment, the hunter-gatherer tribe,
Yeah.
social cohesion was a matter of literal life and death. If a male in the tribe was acting out, being overly aggressive, or even just pointing out uncomfortable realities that threaten the peace of the group.
The women of the tribe often utilize social ostracization.
Exactly. They would essentially shun him.
The silent treatment.
Yes, but weaponized. This collective silence was designed to lower his status and enforce group cohesion.
It was a highly effective, non-violent survival mechanism to manage disruptive behavior.
Right.
So it was a way of maintaining the tribe's equilibrium without resorting to physical combat.
Precisely.
But how does that ancient tribal dynamic translate to, say, a guy getting fired from his accounting job in 2026?
Well, Riker argues that this ancient mechanism of gynocentric silence has now been institutionalized.
Institutionalized and weaponized.
Weaponized by the modern corporate state academia, and the media.
So instead of physical exile into the wilderness,
The modern equivalent is digital and economic exile. The modern tribe uses labels like racist, sexist, or misogynist, not as descriptive terms, but as tools of ostracization.
I see. So Riker's argument is that these labels are deployed to crush political dissent.
Yes, to enforce a strict ideological conformity, allowing the collective to completely sidestep the need to actually debate the facts of whatever the man was saying.
Wow. You don't have to prove his argument wrong.
You just have to prove he is socially toxic.
That's a huge distinction. I see how he's building this. It's an argument about how the rules of engagement have fundamentally changed.
They have.
But to make this case, he leans incredibly heavily on psychology, specifically the work of Jonathan Haidt.
Yes, he brings up moral foundations theory.
Right. For those listening who might not have a background in behavioral psychology, can we do a quick ELI 5 on this?
Explain it like you're 5.
Yeah, explain Haidt's theory and then look at how Riker wields it.
Absolutely. So Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist who really wanted to understand why good people are divided by politics and religion.
Okay.
He proposed that human beings have biological, hardwired moral receptors, much like taste buds on our tongues.
Moral taste buds.
Exactly. He originally identified 5 foundational moral receptors:
Care versus harm.
fairness versus cheating,
Loyalty versus betrayal.
authority versus subversion.
And sanctity versus degradation.
Those are the 5.
Okay, so we all have these 5 moral taste buds. How does this explain the political divide, at least according to Riker's interpretation?
Well, Haidt's original research found that political conservatives generally rely on all 5 of these foundations fairly equally.
Okay.
They value care and fairness, but they also place a high premium on loyalty to the in-group
Respect for authority and tradition.
and a sense of sanctity or purity.
But the modern progressive left,
According to the research, they rely almost exclusively on just 2: care, harm, and fairness cheating.
I see where this is going.
Yeah, Riker takes this psychological framework and applies a very aggressive spin to it.
Because the left operates on only 2 out of the 5 receptors.
He argues they are essentially neurologically stunted when it comes to statecraft.
He argues they literally lack the hardware to understand certain concepts.
Yes. In his view, because they largely ignore loyalty, authority, and sanctity, they are fundamentally incapable of understanding the necessity of hierarchy
Or the duty required to maintain a civilization.
or the sacredness of historical institutions.
Okay, let's ground this. Give me an example.
Take a national border. When a conservative looks at a national border, they see the sanctity of the nation and loyalty to the citizenry.
But when a modern progressive looks at that same border, according to Riker,
Their only active moral receptors are care and fairness. So they just see a cruel barrier that is causing harm to someone seeking a better life.
and Riker argues this makes them moral NPCs.
Yes, non-player characters who are programmed to scream about fairness while dismantling the very structural institutions that keep society from collapsing.
Man. That brings us to another major psychological critique in the book. He takes direct aim at empathy.
Empathy itself, yes.
Usually when we talk about empathy, it is framed as an unalloyed universal good. You can never have too much empathy.
That's the common wisdom.
But Riker brings in the work of Paul Bloom, specifically his book Against Empathy.
Yes.
And he introduces the concept of toxic empathy. How can empathy be toxic?
Bloom's work is highly counterintuitive, but deeply, thoroughly researched.
Right.
Bloom demonstrated that empathy, the act of emotionally feeling what another person is feeling, is actually a spotlight.
It's not a floodlight.
Exactly. It is inherently parochial. It focuses your emotional energy very narrowly on a specific identifiable individual or a specific in-group.
Almost always at the expense of a larger unseen majority.
Right. Riker takes Bloom's premise and frames this toxic empathy as a weapon of modern tribalism.
So empathy isn't a universalizing force that connects us all.
Not in this framework. Riker argues that the modern left uses empathy not to build bridges, but to define boundaries.
Define boundaries? How?
It is used to constantly expand an in-group of perceived victims who require endless accommodation.
While explicitly identifying, excluding, and punishing an outgroup of perceived oppressors.
Exactly. And Riker explicitly notes that in the modern intersectional framework, this oppressor class is specifically targeted at white men,
He argues this is all done under the guise of compassion.
which makes it a very difficult weapon to defend against. If you oppose the policy, you aren't just wrong, you are framed as lacking basic human decency.
He makes a really sharp contrast here, distinguishing this modern, politicized empathy from traditional Judeo-Christian charity.
Yes, and that distinction is absolutely crucial to his argument.
Let's get into that.
He argues that true, impartial Judeo-Christian charity, or agape love, demands justice and goodwill for the individual regardless of their group identity.
Right, it is based on a principle, an objective standard of right and wrong.
But leftist empathy, he argues, is entirely subjective. It demands sacrificing the rights, standards, or property of the individual for the supposed emotional good of a collective victim group.
And he points out how this plays out in real life through what he calls the force apology.
Oh, the struggle sessions.
Yeah. He describes these public apologies when a celebrity, an academic, or a CEO gets caught in a controversy and has to issue that Notes app apology.
He views them as modern struggle sessions, matriarchal rituals of submission.
What is the psychological function of forcing someone to apologize, sometimes for a moral failing that might not even be a real failing?
Well, to understand the term struggle session, we have to look back to Maoist China,
Okay.
where public humiliation was used to break down the psychological resistance of political dissidents.
The individual was forced to confess to various crimes against the people in front of a screaming mob.
Right, not to uncover the truth, but to demonstrate the absolute power of the collective over the individual.
And Riker argues that modern cancel culture functions the exact same way.
The goal of the forced apology isn't forgiveness. The mob almost never forgives the person anyway.
Right. The apology usually just smells like blood in the water to the mob.
Exactly. The psychological function, according to Riker, is to strip a man of his stoic dignity.
To force the male archetype, which is traditionally independent, unapologetic, and anchored to internal principles.
Into a childlike state of dependency, begging the collective for readmission to the tribe.
He terms it psychological castration.
Yes. You are forced to validate their subjective feelings over your objective reality to feed the narcissistic hunger of the mob.
Riker's explicit advice to the truth warrior is to categorically refuse to apologize to a mob, ever, in order to retain your psychological sovereignty.
And never apologize to the mob.
It's a ruthless analysis of power dynamics. But he doesn't just leave this in the realm of celebrity culture or Twitter spats.
No, he goes into hard economics.
Yes. He takes this exact framework, the prioritization of feelings over facts, and applies it to the spectacular collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, SVB, in 2023.
This is a great example.
I found this to be one of the most compelling structural arguments in the book. The financial media largely spun that collapse as a complex tale of interest rate risk and bond portfolios.
Right.
How does Riker connect the bank run to this cultural shift toward emotionalism?
Riker uses SVB as his prime illustrative exhibit of what happens when a masculine-coded system, like banking, is infected by feminine-coded emotionalism.
Okay, so the rot was cultural.
He argues the rot at SVB was at the core culture of the institution. They prioritize what he calls the vibes of the gynocentric social sphere over the cold, unyielding math of a balance sheet,
SVB was notoriously obsessed with their social impact
boasting heavily about their ESG, environmental, social, and governance scorecards.
and their strict adherence to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion quotas.
Exactly.
But didn't they also have a massive unhedged duration risk in their bond portfolio?
They absolutely did, and that is precisely Riker's point. He argues they were so busy checking virtue signaling boxes and managing their public relations image that they entirely neglected the basic, what he terms masculine, laws of banking.
Duration risk and liquidity management.
Yes. So when interest rates rose, their bond portfolio tanked.
And when the bank run started, their pristine ESG score and their diversity hires offered exactly zero shelter from the financial storm.
None. As Riker so bluntly puts it in the text, the market does not care about your pronouns, it cares about your solvency.
That is a harsh line.
It is, but it perfectly encapsulates his thesis. He views the SVB collapse as the ultimate collision of a utopian feelings-based fantasy with unyielding economic reality.
You can manipulate language and social status all you want, but you cannot manipulate mathematics.
Eventually, the bill comes due.
Which naturally pivots us to the next massive question the book tackles.
Right.
If prioritizing feelings over facts leads to that kind of systemic observable failure, how is the public continually convinced to support it?
Why hasn't the system autocorrected?
Exactly. And Riker points a massive finger at the media and the algorithms governing public discourse.
This is section 2 of his argument.
Yes, where he introduces his concept of the simulation and leans heavily into calling ideological opponents NPCs or zombies.
Right.
Now, I want to pause here. NPC is a common internet insult, just meaning someone who can't think for themselves. But Riker seems to be using it in a much deeper, almost philosophical sense.
He is. The NPC metaphor, the non-player character, is central to Riker's entire diagnosis of the modern mind.
How so?
He is arguing that when you are debating a modern social justice advocate, you are not actually engaging with a conscious mind that is dynamically processing new information.
You are watching a biological subroutine execute a predictable behavioral loop.
Exactly. They lack what philosophers call the divine spark of Cartesian doubt.
Let's define Cartesian doubt for the listener.
Certainly. It comes from René Descartes, the philosopher famous for "I think, therefore I am."
Right.
Cartesian doubt is the rigorous, systematic process of being skeptical about the truth of one's beliefs.
It is the ability to step outside yourself, look at your own deeply held opinion, and ask, what if I am entirely wrong about this?
Yes. Riker argues that the modern ideologue lacks this internal monologue. They do not originate independent thought.
So if they aren't originating the thoughts, where are the thoughts coming from?
He connects this to the French philosopher Jean Baudrillard's concept of simulacra and simulation.
Which argues that in the postmodern age, society has replaced all reality and meaning with symbols and signs.
A simulacrum is essentially a copy of something that no longer has an original. Riker applies this to political discourse.
So the ideologue doesn't hold unique opinions derived from lived experience or logical deduction.
Instead, they simulate opinions based on pre-programmed social scripts that are downloaded directly from legacy media and social media algorithms.
It's like arguing with an advanced chatbot. It sounds human, it strings words together perfectly, but there is no actual ghost in the machine understanding what is being said.
Precisely. And he goes into the actual mechanics of how this programming is broadcast to the masses.
He brings up Noam Chomsky, which is surprising given Chomsky is a massive figure on the political left.
It is a brilliant tactical move by Riker.
Riker calls Chomsky's 1988 book Manufacturing Consent an original red pill text. How does a conservative-leaning author utilize Chomsky?
He uses the left's own critique of corporate power against them. Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent outlines a propaganda model of the media.
Chomsky argued that the media doesn't tell you exactly what to think, but it strictly controls the boundaries of what is acceptable to think about.
He outlined a filtration model ownership, advertising, sourcing, flack, and a common enemy that dictates the news.
And Riker uses this exact model to predict why modern corporate media pushes a collectivist, feminine-coded narrative.
Yes, they do it to protect entrenched state and corporate interests by keeping the population divided.
Focused on emotional culture war issues rather than systemic power imbalances.
Exactly. But he acknowledges we aren't just watching nightly network news anymore.
The delivery mechanism has evolved into the algorithm.
And this is where he brings in the MIT virality equation.
What is the data showing us about how our discourse is actually being programmed?
Riker cites a very specific 2021 research paper published in Nature Communications by Sinan Errol, a researcher at MIT.
Okay.
The research team examined millions of social media posts, specifically on Twitter, to see what actually drives engagement.
And what did they find?
They found a mathematical certainty. Moral emotional language, specifically using words like hate, war, destroy, or disgusting, boosts the retweet rate by exactly 20% for each emotional word used in the post.
20% per word. That is a massive algorithmic incentive.
It is the driving engine of the internet. Riker uses this hard data to prove that the algorithms controlling our public square are intentionally programmed to reward hysteria.
We are feeding our attention into a machine that consumes civility and nuance and generates endless conflict.
Outrage functions literally like a pharmacological drug on the human brain, releasing dopamine.
The algorithm is the dealer and the NPC is the addict.
Which is nice.
And the weapons of this outrage are words themselves. This brings us to a chapter I found fascinating titled Babel, Weaponized Language and the Death of Meaning.
Yes.
Riker drops this massive rule for his truth warriors. He who defines the terms wins the debate.
It's fundamental.
He argues that linguistic manipulation isn't just a byproduct of the culture war, it is the primary offensive tactic of the left. They change definitions mid-argument.
This is a profound point. If you control the dictionary, you control the boundaries of reality.
Right.
Riker argues that when the left cannot win a debate based on empirical facts, they simply change the rules of language.
They redefine words like racism, violence, or woman to suit their immediate political needs.
Furthermore, they elevate subjective lived experience as an epistemological authority that is somehow superior to objective, measurable data.
Can you give an example of how he sees this playing out in the real world?
Riker points to congressional hearings as a prime theater for this.
Oh, yeah.
He notes that you will frequently see a rational, methodical expert presenting hard statistical data on an issue.
Only to be interrupted by a politician who begins weeping, shouting, or reciting a deeply personal, emotional anecdote about their lived experience.
And the statistical facts are entirely ignored by the media coverage.
Instead, the validity of the claim is measured by how much it makes the audience cry or feel outraged.
Not its actual correspondence to reality. It is the complete replacement of masculine-coded reason with feminine-coded emotionalism.
To illustrate this manipulation of narrative, Riker walks the reader step by step through the Covington Catholic incident from early 2019.
Yes.
He frames this as his prime exhibit of mass delusion and the danger of the simulacrum.
For anyone who forgot, this was the viral video of the teenager, Nicholas Sandmann, standing in front of the Native American elder, Nathan Phillips, in Washington, D.C.
The initial media narrative smeared this teenager as a racist aggressor. How does Riker deconstruct this event?
Riker dissects it as a masterclass in the ad misericordiam fallacy.
The appeal to pity.
Correct, the appeal to pity. The media needed a villain to fit a pre-existing narrative about white male entitlement and conservative aggression.
They took a highly complex, multi-layered interaction and selectively edited it to appeal to the care-harm moral receptor of the public.
They created a hologram of consensus.
But when the full, unedited 2-hour video emerged, the actual evidence showed Sandmann just standing there impassively while other groups hurled abuse.
So why does Riker think the media ran with it so aggressively even before checking the facts?
Riker argues it wasn't a mistake. It was an exercise in power.
The goal was to terrify the silent majority.
It was a public execution of a teenager's reputation meant to serve as a warning.
Look what we can do to you if you step out of line or wear the wrong hat. We will destroy your life, and the truth will not save you.
And he pairs that example directly with the Hunter Biden laptop controversy right before the 2020 presidential election.
Yes, another perfect example.
You had tangible, verifiable evidence, a digital record, yet 51 former intelligence officials signed a public letter falsely claiming it had all the classic earmarks of Russian disinformation.
Riker points out this wasn't sloppy journalism, it was strategic information warfare.
And he connects our reaction to this to a concept called Gell-Mann amnesia. I love this concept. Can you explain what it is?
It's a brilliantly coined term by the late author Michael Crichton, named after his friend, the physicist Murray Gell-Mann.
Right.
The phenomenon describes the bizarre cognitive dissonance we all experience with the media. Imagine you are an expert in a specific field, say structural engineering.
Okay.
You read an article in the newspaper about a bridge collapse, and you realize the journalist has no idea what they're talking about. The facts are wrong, the physics are wrong, the conclusions are absurd.
You realize the newspaper is peddling fiction.
Exactly. You see the wizard behind the curtain.
But then you turn the page to an article about foreign policy in the Middle East, a topic you know nothing about, and you completely forget the lesson you just learned.
You suffer from amnesia. You assume the newspaper is suddenly telling the absolute truth about this new topic, even though you just proved they are incompetent or dishonest on the previous page.
Riker argues that the institutional left relies on Gell-Mann amnesia to maintain power.
He views the modern cottage industry of fact-checking not as journalism, but as a priestly class whose sole job is enforcing the narrative and labeling uncomfortable truths as misinformation.
So, if the language is captured and the media is running the simulation, it begs the massive question, where is the hardware?
Where is it built?
Where are people being programmed before they even enter the workforce? Because Reichel points a massive, unapologetic finger directly at the modern university.
This leads us right into section 3 of our analysis, institutional capture and the death of science.
Riker does not hold back. He views the modern university system as a literal grift.
Extracting exorbitant tuition dollars to fund a propaganda machine.
What data is he using to back up this accusation?
He relies on empirical polling data to establish the correlation between time spent in academia and ideological conformity,
He cites expensive 2022 Pew Research Center data.
showing a very sharp, undeniable correlation between higher education levels and extreme partisanship, specifically among Democrats.
The data suggests that the university no longer functions as a marketplace of ideas that broadens the mind.
Instead, the more time a student spends in the academic machine, the more radicalized and rigid they become.
The university, in Riker's view, systematically dismantles the epistemological tools required for independent thought tools like formal logic, historical context, and the pursuit of objective truth.
And replaces them with an intersectional orthodoxy.
He goes so far as to say that consensus has completely replaced methodological doubt in scientific inquiry.
He compares modern academia to the Inquisition forcing Galileo to his knees. He says the modern hysterical mob just traded the religious cassock for the white lab coat.
It's a potent historical analogy.
He traces the philosophical root of this academic decay back to the weaponization of a very specific book. Thomas Kuhn's 1962 text, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions.
Kuhn argued that science doesn't always progress in a straight, linear line of accumulating facts.
Instead, it operates within a dominant paradigm until too many anomalies build up, resulting in a sudden paradigm shift.
Which sounds perfectly reasonable on its face, so how is it weaponized?
Riker argues that postmodern academics hijacked Kuhn's descriptive history and turned it into a prescriptive relativistic weapon.
The left took the idea of paradigms and used it to argue that objective truth itself does not exist.
They claim that what we call science or truth is merely a social construct built by those in power.
Usually framed as a white male invention designed to maintain the patriarchy.
By fundamentally undermining the concept of objective truth, they open the door to epistemological chaos.
If truth is just a construct of power, then 2 + 2 can indeed equal 5.
Provided that equation validates the feelings of an allegedly oppressed group.
Here is where the book gets incredibly deep philosophically, and I want to spend some time here because it is a fascinating contradiction that Riker points out.
It really is.
He takes aim at the very foundation of the modern secular worldview: materialism and purely unguided Darwinism.
Right.
He says, if you believe that human consciousness is nothing more than a series of pre-programmed chemical reactions in the brain, just biology, physics, and atoms bumping into each other, then reason isn't actually a tool for discovering universal truth.
Precisely. If materialism is completely true, then human reasoning is just a biological accident.
It is merely a survival mechanism that evolved to help us pass on genes.
Much like a gazelle evolving fast legs to run from a lion. The gazelle's speed doesn't have truth value, it just has survival value.
Right. So if our thoughts are just chemical fizz, they have no authority to claim objective validity.
Riker argues that you are using a non-material standard, the laws of logic, to argue for a purely material universe.
You are kicking the philosophical ladder out from under yourself.
You can't trust your own brain to tell you the truth about the universe if your brain is just a meat computer programmed for survival, not for truth.
It is one of the most profound philosophical critiques in the text.
He connects this explicitly to what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness.
He references the work of Thomas Nagel, famous for his essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat?
And David Chalmers.
The hard problem asks why physical brain processes are accompanied by subjective conscious experience.
Why does it feel like something to see the color red or to feel grief?
That subjective experience, that intentionality, cannot be reduced to mere data processing or chemical reactions.
The lights are on and someone is actually home.
Exactly. Humans possess an intentionality and a free will that entirely transcends physical inputs.
Therefore, Riker concludes, the strict materialist worldview is demonstrably philosophically false.
Those who cling to it, in academia or elsewhere, are intentionally ignoring their own divine spark of reason just to fit in with the modern herd.
They are denying their own humanity.
And he points out that the experts pushing this herd mentality often aren't even playing by their own rules.
Not at all.
Look at the example he brings up regarding Dan Ariely and his nudge theory.
This perfectly illustrates his point about the grift of the ivory tower.
Ariely was a massive superstar in the field of behavioral economics. His entire career was built on preaching that human beings are fundamentally irrational bugs who cannot make good decisions on their own.
And therefore, we need the benevolent guiding hand of the state to nudge our choices in the right direction.
It is the ultimate elitist framework. You are too stupid to run your own life, so we will manage it for you.
Exactly. But what happened? In 2021, Ariely had major papers retracted for egregious data fraud.
The irony is just off the charts.
The intellectual guru who built a career proving that humans are incapable of rational honesty was caught manufacturing the very data used to prove we are irrational.
Riker uses this to expose the authority of the expert class as a giant confidence game.
And to combat this false authority of the so-called scientific consensus, Riker points the truth warrior toward the legal system.
He highlights a massive 1993 Supreme Court ruling, Dauber v. Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals.
He refers to this ruling as a tactical nuke in the culture war,
Why is a 1993 court case about pharmaceuticals a tactical nuke?
because the Daubert standard legally established how evidence is admitted in a federal court.
It explicitly established that scientific consensus is not admissible as evidence of objective truth.
The fact that 100 scientists agree on something means nothing in a court of law.
What matters is peer-reviewed testing, falsifiability, known error rates, and rigorous methodology.
When an NBC or an ideologue attempts to shut down a debate by citing the consensus, Riker advises the reader to demand the raw data and the methodology.
He claims that if you do this, you will watch the opponent short-circuit.
Because they only know the feelings the data is supposed to produce. They have absolutely no understanding of the methodology itself.
Demand the raw data. Don't let them hide behind the robes of the consensus.
That is a highly tactical tool.
And that analytical, uncompromising look at data brings us to what is easily the most controversial section of the book: biology, history, and the architecture of patriarchy.
Section 4.
This is where Riker presents his unapologetic defense of traditional gender roles and hierarchies.
He argues that the modern left's obsession with the blank slate theory, the idea that men and women are psychologically exactly the same and entirely interchangeable in society, is a biological absurdity that defies all evolutionary psychology.
He states flat out, equality of value does not mean sameness of function.
He builds this argument heavily on the concept of cognitive dimorphism.
Just as men and women are physically dimorphic, having different average heights, muscle mass, and skeletal structures, he argues we are cognitively dimorphic as well.
It is the scientifically backed reality that men and women, on a broad aggregate level, have different biological aptitudes and drastically different risk assessment heuristics.
He brings in a 2022 University of Chicago study to back this up, right?
Yes, the study examined decision-making under pressure. It showed that women generally prioritize social cohesion, safety, and harm reduction.
Men, on the other hand, prioritize aggregate outcomes, system building, and are biologically wired to take high risks for high rewards.
Riker makes it very clear that both of these heuristics are absolutely necessary for a functional, surviving society.
You need the feminine instinct to protect the vulnerable, and you need the masculine instinct to build the infrastructure and slay the mammoth.
But his core argument is that these traits must be correctly compartmentalized.
Precisely. Riker argues that the modern push for forced equity attempts to jam female risk aversion heuristics into male-dominated spheres that require extreme risk tolerance and stoic detachment.
Fears like national defense, high-level banking, or heady industry.
By doing so, he argues, we paralyze those systems. We make them softer, slower, and ultimately incapable of surviving a real crisis.
And he doesn't just rely on psychology. He brings in a mountain of anthropological data to back it up.
He points to the Human Relations Area files, the HRAF.
For the listener, this is a massive database at Yale that has examined over 150 diverse civilizations and cultures throughout all of recorded human history.
What does Riker say this data reveals about human organization?
Riker states that the HRAF data reveals a cold, hard truth. Male-led family structures, patriarchal systems, are the prevailing, most effective human adaptation for survival.
Across thousands of years and vastly different geographies, humans have organized this way.
Female-dominated societies, matriarchies, are statistically insignificant in the historical record, and when they do occur, they exhibit far less stability and longevity.
Traditional patriarchal arrangements, he argues, represent an evolutionary necessity for human flourishing, not a malicious social invention designed to oppress women.
He takes this biological reality and connects it to political philosophy.
Specifically applying John Locke's social contract theory directly to gender relations.
This part is incredibly provocative.
He describes the traditional patriarchal structure not as oppression, but as a male protection agreement. How does he define this contract?
It is a symbiotic contract. In this historical agreement, men offer their labor, their acquired resources, and their physical protection, often at the cost of their own lives or health.
In exchange for female domestic commitment, support, and reproductive assurance.
It is a trade of distinct complementary value. Riker argues that modern intersectional feminism completely nullified this social contract.
Oh, so.
He argues that feminism demanded all the historical rights, resources, and protections of male support, but categorically refused any of the corresponding respect, domestic duties, or responsibilities.
It broke the trade.
Riker claims this has created a parasitic societal arrangement.
The result, which we see in modern dating and marriage statistics, is that men are realizing the contract is void, and are systematically opting out of society, marriage, and ambition.
Meanwhile, women are left overworked, constantly anxious, and deeply lonely because the protective structure they biologically crave has been dismantled.
He illustrates this inherent cognitive dimorphism brilliantly, and he uses the ultimate game of pure intellect, chess.
He talks about the Polgar sisters.
This is a famous case study. Their father, an educational psychologist, believed that geniuses are made, not born.
He gave his daughters intensive, optimized, lifelong training in chess from early childhood to prove that women could compete at the highest levels.
And they did. Judith Polgar became a grandmaster and one of the best players in the world.
But what does Riker point out about how they played the game?
This is where Riker's argument reaches its nuance. He doesn't say women can't be brilliant at chess.
He points out that even in the purest, most abstract test of logic, where these women receive the exact same intensive training as top men, their playing styles still remained inherently distinct.
The female champions, including the Polgar sisters, heavily favored tactical sharpness, calculating immediate localized skirmishes and aggressive combinations on the board.
But the top-tier men played differently.
Yes. The absolute top-level male play favored deep, structural, overarching strategic domination.
They were playing a longer, more abstract game of spatial control, willing to sacrifice immediate tactical advantage for long-term systemic superiority.
Riker argues that even when the playing field is perfectly level and the training is identical, the biological hardwiring dictates a different approach to problem solving. It's unavoidable.
And he argues that deliberately ignoring this hardwiring has massive civilizational consequences.
He takes us out of the chessboard and into history, using the fall of the Roman Republic as a historical mirror for our own societal demise.
The parallels he draws here are striking.
As Rome began to crumble, he notes that gender role fluidity increased dramatically, and the stoic, martial virtues that literally built the empire were systematically mocked and stripped away.
The historical figures he chooses are very telling. He points to the Gracchi brothers.
In the late Roman Republic, the Gracchi brothers acted as populist socialists.
They bypassed the traditional deliberative authority of the Senate to appeal directly to the democratic, emotional masses, offering free grain and land redistribution.
Riker compares them directly to modern social media activists and progressive politicians who promise endless free provisions to buy loyalty, bankrupting the state in the process.
And on the other side, you had Cato the Elder.
Yes, Cato the Elder was the ultimate traditionalist. He was constantly ranting in the Senate about the laws of mos maiorum, the unwritten code from which the ancient Romans derived their social norms.
It translates to ancestral customs.
These were the customs that kept Roman men hard, disciplined, and stoic, and kept Roman women sacred and revered within the domestic sphere.
Riker argues that when those boundaries blurred in Rome, when the masculine stoicism was replaced by populist emotionalism, political chaos, dictatorship, and ultimate collapse inevitably followed.
And the most frustrating part for Riker is that anyone who tries to point out this historical cycle, anyone who tries to ring the warning bell, gets immediately silenced by the zombie horde.
To prove this, he brings up Cassie Jay's 2016 documentary, The Red Pill.
This is a perfect modern example of the gynocentric silence in action.
Cassie Jay was a recognized, award-winning feminist filmmaker.
She set out to make a documentary exposing the men's rights movement as a hate group. But what actually happened?
She did something modern journalists rarely do. She actually sat down, turned the camera on, and listened to their arguments without interrupting them.
And over the course of filming, she was confronted with statistics about male suicide rates, workplace deaths, paternity fraud, and family court bias.
Her mind was changed by the objective data. She realized the narrative she had been fed was false.
And how did the system react to a feminist changing her mind?
With absolute ruthless suppression.
Feminist groups systematically boycotted the film, protested theaters that tried to show it, and successfully lobbied to have it suppressed on multiple digital platforms.
They completely refused to engage with the arguments or the data presented in the film. They simply shut it down to protect the simulation.
Riker says this is the ultimate hallmark of the NPC. Ideological possession so complete, so fragile, that the host cannot even process dissenting information without experiencing a psychological breakdown.
Which brings us to the most vital, practical part of the text and the ultimate question for the listener.
If this diagnosis is correct, how do you actually survive?
How do you maintain your career, your family, and your sanity in a world actively, algorithmically trying to suppress your ability to think?
This leads us to the final section of the book, the arsenal forging the truth warrior.
Riker provides a highly tactical manual for maintaining sovereignty in a world governed by groupthink.
The core of this defense rests on three pillars: stoic self-mastery, a deep grounding in classical philosophy, and crucially, an unapologetic religious foundation.
Yes, the religious aspect is not a side note for Riker. It is the absolute bedrock of his strategy.
He argues for the absolute necessity of a vertical connection to the divine, to the concept of the logos.
Let's define logos for the listener because it's a heavy philosophical and theological term.
Logos is a Greek term that means word, reason, or plan. In classical philosophy, it is the universal divine reason, the underlying order of the universe.
In Christian theology, it is the mind of God made manifest.
Riker argues that without an anchor to this transcendent objective order, human beings are hopelessly lost.
And he brings the receipts to prove it. He doesn't just quote scripture, he brings hard medical data.
He cites 2022 World Health Organization data showing that deeply secular post-Christian societies have significantly higher suicide rates and despair.
He pairs that with a massive 2021 peer-reviewed study from the Mayo Clinic analyzing mortality data.
The findings are staggering. Attending religious services is statistically associated with a 25% reduction in all-cause mortality and a massive 40% reduction in depression.
The data supports his philosophical claim. Riker states bluntly that secularism isn't just a flawed philosophy, it is an active public health crisis.
The modern blue pill of atheism and materialism promises ultimate freedom, freedom from rules, freedom from judgment.
But what it actually delivers is absolute bondage to digital dopamine loops, pharmaceutical dependency, and state-enforced delusion.
Without that vertical axis connecting a man to objective truth and divine order, Riker argues we are left to wander the horizontal plane.
We become slaves to our basest biological instincts and the shifting, terrifying whims of the mob.
Okay, so once a man has established that vertical spiritual anchor, how does he fight on the horizontal plane?
To defend against the mob, Riker reaches back to the Middle Ages and resurrects the medieval trivium.
Framing it as a tactical weapon system. Let's break down the trivium because this is the actual practical armor he is handing the listener.
It consists of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. Let's start with grammar.
Right. In this context, grammar isn't about correcting someone who ends a sentence with a preposition.
Grammar is the demanding of precise definitions. It is establishing the exact boundaries of reality before a debate can even commence.
How does that look in a real-world argument?
Imagine you're at a corporate meeting or a family dinner, and the zombie horde says they demand equity.
Using the tool of grammar, you stop them and calmly ask them to define equity without using the word equality.
When they claim there is systemic racism in an institution, you ask them to name the specific mechanism, the specific policy, the exact time, date, and location where the racism is occurring.
You force them out of abstract emotionalism and into concrete reality.
By pinning down their shifting linguistic sands, you destroy their foundation before they can even launch their emotional attack.
I love that. You don't let them change the dictionary. Okay, so once you've constrained them with grammar, you apply logic.
Yes, logic is the mechanics of thought. Once the terms are defined, you use formal logic to expose the inherent fallacies and contradictions in their argument.
If they say, follow the science, but then demand that men can get pregnant, you use logic to demonstrate that they are holding two mutually exclusive realities in their head at the same time.
Finally, rhetoric is the polished delivery. It is the tool you use to articulate the truth compellingly and dismantle the opponent in the public square.
Not for the sake of convincing the ideologue, because you cannot convince an NPC.
But to demonstrate the truth to the silent observers watching the debate.
And within this trivium framework, Riker advocates for a very specific high-level debate tactic, the steelman technique.
Everyone knows what a straw man argument is. When you attack a weak, exaggerated caricature of your opponent's argument, because it's easy to knock down.
But what is the steelman?
The steelman is the ultimate flex of intellectual dominance.
Instead of weakening their argument, you strip their argument of all its emotional padding, all its linguistic tricks, and you rebuild it for them.
You articulate their position so clearly and profoundly that they say, yes, that is exactly what I believe.
You understand their argument better than they do.
And then, once you have erected it in its absolute strongest, most formidable form, you defeat it with superior logic, historical precedent, and objective data.
Be the surgeon, not the brawler. You dissect the argument. You don't just smash it.
And for the closing blow, he suggests a technique called the imminent critique.
This is intellectual judo. Can you walk us through how to execute an imminent critique?
An immanent critique is when you take the left's own stated highest values and you weaponize them against their own system.
You force them to live by their own impossible rules.
For example, if a university or a corporation claims that their highest non-negotiable virtue is inclusivity and diversity.
You don't argue against diversity.
Instead, you demand the inclusion of classical Western history, Christian ethics, and traditional masculine virtue in their curriculum or boardroom.
Because true diversity would include diversity of thought.
Exactly. And when they inevitably refuse, when they exclude those traditional concepts, you expose them.
You prove that they don't actually care about inclusivity, they care about ideological control.
You force their system to collapse under the sheer undeniable weight of its own hypocrisy. You expose them as the actual authoritarians.
That requires immense mental discipline to operate that way. It requires you to not get angry, to not take the bait.
Which is exactly why Riker points his readers toward the great Stoic philosopher, the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius.
Specifically, he cites Meditations, Book 6, Section 30.
How does the Diary of a Roman Emperor help a guy navigating a hostile HR department in 2026?
Aurelius offers a timeless manual for maintaining what he calls sovereign logic when facing the vexation of the mob.
The core tenet of Stoicism is understanding what is within your control and what is not.
You cannot control the madness of the crowd.
But you can always retreat to your inner fortress of reason.
The mob can scream at you, they can fire you, they can cancel you, and they can deplatform you from the digital town square.
But they cannot force their way into the mind of a man who refuses to accept their false premises.
Riker teaches that their emotional instability, their constant need for external validation, is their ultimate weakness. Your rational, stoic detachment is an impenetrable armor.
But he doesn't just advocate for retreating into your own mind. He knows that an isolated man is a vulnerable man.
Riker calls for action in the physical world. He calls for the building of parallel institutions.
He says we have to become the Gutenberg press of the modern age.
When the printing press was invented, it broke the monopoly the church had on information. How are we doing that today?
He points directly to the rise of independent, long-form podcasting, specifically mentioning platforms like the Joe Rogan Experience as the new decentralized marketplace of ideas.
By bypassing the legacy media gatekeepers, the corporate news networks, and the filtered algorithms, men are finding spaces to have long-form, unfiltered, deeply nuanced conversations.
We are breaking the monopoly of what he calls the cathedral of elite consensus.
And the establishment hates it.
They are terrified of it.
Yeah.
The elite panic because they completely lose their ability to control the narrative when men are allowed to simply sit down, speak freely, and exchange unapproved ideas without a corporate moderator fact-checking them in real time.
That is the ultimate patriarchal duty Riker assigns to his readers. It is a call to action.
He says cease doom scrolling. Stop arguing with nameless avatars on the internet.
Begin constructing. Establish your own businesses. Build strong physical networks in your local community, and absolutely refuse to participate in collective delusions.
Refuse to say 2 + 2 = 5.
Every single time you identify a logical fallacy, every time you calmly demand a clear definition, you create another node in the growing network of independent thinkers.
You become a beacon for other men who are too afraid to speak up.
It is a process of reclaiming territory, one mind at a time.
So bringing this all together as we enter our final thoughts.
We have journeyed through the immense, sprawling scope of Conrad Riker's Truth Warrior.
We've looked at the collapse of objective meaning through weaponized language and toxic empathy.
We've examined the institutional capture of science and academia, tracing the philosophical rot of materialism.
And we've explored the hard biological imperatives of traditional patriarchal hierarchies that Riker argues are necessary for human survival.
Riker views the concept of the red pill not as some cheap internet political slogan, but as the recognition of Plato's form of the good.
Yes. Referring back to Plato's allegory of the cave, the people in the cave believe the shadows on the wall are reality. The man who escapes the cave is blinded by the real sun, by the form of the good.
Exactly. Taking a red pill is the agonizing, deeply difficult acceptance that the universe is ordered, hierarchical, and completely, utterly indifferent to our subjective feelings.
Choosing the red pill means choosing the cold, hard basalt of reality over the warm, comforting, simulated shadows on the cave wall.
It is a rigorous, demanding, and highly uncompromising philosophy. It asks a lot of the reader.
But analyzing all these sources, looking at the historical data and the psychological frameworks Riker presents, leaves us with a profound, lingering question that extends even beyond Riker's text.
It is something for every listener to carefully consider.
If human society continues to bifurcate at this accelerated rate, with one side retreating entirely into subjective lived experience, demanding endless emotional validation and linguistic control,
While the other side anchors exclusively to unyielding formal logic, historical hierarchy, and objective metrics.
what happens when these two factions completely lose the ability to speak the same language?
Can a civilization actually survive? Can it maintain a shared infrastructure or a legal system when its fundamental baseline definition of what constitutes truth is split squarely in two?
Or is a final structural collapse not just a possibility, but a mathematical certainty?
That is a chilling, monumental thought to end on, and exactly why texts like this spark such intense, necessary debate.
We cannot ignore these questions.
If this deep dive resonated with you, if it challenged you or clarified things you've been observing in the culture, you need to explore the source material for yourself. Do not just take our word for it.
Check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the full book, Truth Warrior, Defeating Zombie Hordes of Groupthink.
And make sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for his continuing in-depth analysis of these cultural phenomena.
Thank you for joining us in the deep end today.
We appreciate your time and your pursuit of the truth. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the show for more deep dives into the knowledge that shapes our world. Keep questioning the narrative, keep building your arsenal, and we'll see you next time.